Welcome to Smashed Avo Property. Today is part 3 of the Common First Home Buyer Question series, where we are delving deep into negotiation. And I'm honoured to be joined once more by the host of the Millennial Investor podcast and a very good friend of mine, Joey DeGarda.
Make it a really obscure number, and I love doing it all the time. I say it's at 546,500 because that's where my client's pre-approved limit is up to. You sell a really sincere story that it's pretty believable. Like, and you're not lowballing them. You're just trying to save yourself or your clients, whatever scenario you're in, that little bit of extra money, just as they were trying to push that little bit extra out of you. By making your final offer in a really obscure one, it makes it look like it's literally all you got.
As always, seek your own professional financial, legal, taxation, and property investing advice for your current situation. Everything we talk about is just our opinion and general in nature and should never be considered as personal advice. This episode is brought to you by pricefinder.com.au, one of the most comprehensive property data providers in Australia. As part of the Domain Group, Pricefinder collects detailed property data from multiple sources so you don't have to, including property ownership, phone numbers, property zoning, over 30 years of sales and rental history, and real-time listing and auction results. You can also purchase the title certificates on their platform if you need to. Pricefinder has a feature called Property Scout. It's designed especially for investors to find development opportunities by searching properties by zoning and land size. Pricefinder also has a great interactive mapping tool that makes your search easier and faster. So without any further ado, let's get house hunting with Joey. What's going on, guys? It is Jordan DeYong.
And this is Joey DeGarda.
And we are back at it again. This is episode 3. And today we're diving deep into negotiation. Bit of a touchy subject. Everyone's kind of got their own methods and strategies and plans. And I've heard a whole bunch of different things. And, you know, it's all well and good. Everyone's got their own risk profiles and their own ways to go about things. But I think, you know, today we'll dive into a little bit more of an overview and how we've sort of approached things in our experiences. I mean, I've definitely done some, my old man's a real estate agent, as you guys already know, and he taught me a lot of things along the journey. So hopefully I can relay that onto you guys. And I'm sure you, Joey, have got your own experiences too, yeah?
Yeah, of course, mate. Absolutely. Doing it for a living on behalf of clients, and obviously done it a handful of times for myself as well. But as you've touched on there's plenty of different ways to negotiate and different strategies. So we're not saying this is the be all and end all, but this is just some advice that we'd give, obviously not really knowing your individual circumstances. As you've touched on there, your old man's a real estate agent. So who's to say that our listeners don't have those relationships within their own networks as well?
Yeah, 100%. And I think you touched on a good point there, Joey. We don't know your price point. We don't know what property you're buying. We don't know the value of the property or anything like that. So take everything we say today as a bit of a grain of salt and a way to maybe set up your own plan. But I think, you know, you can just take it as a grain of salt and go ahead from there. But you ready to dive in there, Joey?
Let's get started.
All right, Joey. Should I offer the advertised price of the property that I'm looking at just straight off the bat?
9 times out of 10, or probably more than 9 times out of 10, the answer would be no. The agents are going to price their properties expecting the potential buyers to want to haggle, to drive them down. So they've factored their bottom line into that advertised sale price. So say they put it on the market for $1 million. They've had that conversation with the vendors and they know that the vendors are willing to accept 900 for argument's sake. So yeah, I would never really go in strong and give them that offer as my very first one. There might be a very select few cases where it's an absolute one-of-a-kind property. You already know it's priced very aggressively. You've got a relationship with the agent who has given you it is the owner's bottom line. And look, and that's happened a couple of times within my business where through that relationship with the agent, they've gone, the bottom line is 700 grand. That's exactly what they're going to take. And that's what they're asking. So if you can get that property at that price, then take it. And for my client, it was a property that ticked every single one of their boxes. So in order to secure that asset, that's what we needed to pay. So there's that very rare circumstance where you might not, but as I said, the vast, vast majority of the time, yeah, they're willing to, they've already built that buffer into their ask. So they know that their vendors will take, it might be 10, 15% less than what they're asking.
Yeah, I think you've pretty much nailed it on the head there. The only other thing that I would add is just analyze what sort of market you're in. If you're in a really hot seller's market where there's 10 to 20 potential buyers for the one specific property, then you might not do a really low ball offer or go in that sort of medium range. It might be if it's suitable and if it's priced as you'd expect, and you're happy with it and you've done a valuation and it's coming in at the right price, it might be easier to just go in a little bit lower than the advertised price, but try and seal the deal as much as possible. I mean, me personally, I've got a Dutch background, and I love to haggle. I love the negotiation. I love the art of the deal. So I don't think I would do that specifically, but yeah, I have heard a lot of commentary about, if you're just trying to seal the property and, you've done all your due diligence and you're 100% sold on it's worth what they're asking for it to be worth, and you want a quick deal done, then that may be a way to do it. But I think we'll dive into more of those concepts as we go through these questions too. So, Joey, a pretty common one. I've been scrolling through Real Estate Domain, and I'm looking at these properties, and they've got a range, and the range is quite significant. Like sometimes it's 10%, sometimes it's 15%. I'm looking at a property for $550,000, or that's what I'm expecting to pay, and the range is $500,000 to $600,000. It's pretty ridiculous. And why do they do this? What does it mean?
Simply a marketing strategy, and you probably are able to speak to this as well, Jordan, given your old man's background. But if you've got your budget set at 500 grand and your search parameters are 500 grand and you're not going to search anything over that, and the agent's got that property that they know is probably worth 600, they're going to put that guide of 500 to 600 there just so it appears in your search. You may not have the budget, but you may have that little bit of resource that you could fall back on. So if it's the right property and it does appeal to you, it would never have otherwise popped up in your search if they didn't lower that price rank. So purely a marketing strategy to get you potentially not necessarily overextending, but exposing you to properties that you wouldn't have otherwise seen based on your strict criteria. Do you want to add a little bit more? You're probably going to be the expert behind this one, given the family background.
Yeah, for sure. 100%. It's a marketing component. I mean, generally what they like to do is if the property is going to auction, then obviously they want as many people as they possibly can get there at auction. And by putting in that sort of lower end price range, although, sometimes the vendor will be happy to accept that lower end price range, but not, maybe 80% of the time or whatever. But essentially they're just trying to get more and more people into this auction scenario or interested in the property and getting inquiries and, listing clicks and, all that sort of feedback is really good to their vendors. So obviously the more interaction they can get with their listing, the better they're going to look as a real estate agent. But yeah, essentially, what in an auction scenario, generally the first home buyers are the first ones to sort of start at that lower range. So on an auction day, it starts at that sort of really low ball area that someone might go, in that scenario, someone might offer, 480, and then it goes to 500 and then 520. And then, the first home buyers are out of the picture, and then the investors come in and they're starting at, 540, 560, and then it starts to creep up slowly, incrementally from there. But essentially that's the game plan, is just get more eyes on the listing, more clicks on the listing, more interaction, and relay that on to their vendor to represent how good their performance has been, but also getting more people at the auction as well. So yeah, and I think we'll delve into, what to expect from the different sort of lower offer and the higher offer in the price range going forward. But yeah, I think that's mostly a marketing strategy, really. So speaking of that sort of top end of the range, as the advertised priced, is that always too overpriced?
Not necessarily. So it comes with experience in a particular marketplace. You'll start to get to know particular agents. So for example, in a marketplace that I work in, kind of south-ish of Sydney, or the CBD rather, here in Sydney, there's a particular agent within a particular agency that I always know likes to, and I don't want to call them out for underquoting, but always likes to give a really, really, really low guide. And that's the whole range, whether it's 600 to 650,000, I'd know to probably add an extra 10%, and that's what the property will go for. So once you start to get a feel for the particular markets that you're working in, you'll start to understand what fair value is. And if you, again, we touched on it in our last episode, once you have a look at the recent sales history, you'll start to get a really good appreciation of where that fair market value is. And then when you see their guide, you'll go, gee, wow, that's well over, or gee, wow, that's well under. So it's really, I don't know, I suppose agent specific, and obviously market specific as well. So yeah, it's not necessarily always overpriced, but it definitely pays, particularly on this instance when you've got such a wide range as a guide, to do your due diligence and to do your market research and investigation.
Yeah, I think also, like, put yourself in the shoes of a real estate agent. Like, they're initially, if someone's selling a house, they're looking for the best real estate agent in the area to list their property for them and get the best sale done. And essentially, what happens in some scenarios is the real estate agents will all do their own valuations and they'll present it to the client. And most real estate agents like to give a higher valuation, or the highest valuation they possibly can get, being what they can do, being legally. And what happens in some scenarios is that expectation is then carried forward through the campaign and through the listing. And so to keep the clients happy, if they've put in a really high valuation, they sort of represent that by the higher range of the higher number of the range there. So essentially, that it keeps the clients happy, plus it gives them marketing capabilities, brings more people in to look at the listing, plus keeping that client happy, saying, oh yeah, no, we've definitely got interested in that higher range. And I mean, ultimately they do want to get higher than that range. That's the goal, or as much as possible. But yeah, I think Joey's touched on that sort of point. But yeah, just talking about it from a real estate agent's point of shoes as well. So on the other side of that, Joey, on the lower side of the range, is that the lowest, or should I throw in a low ball offer even lower than that?
It's really important to make sure to treat your relationship with that particular selling agent. Really tread carefully and make sure you treat them with respect. You don't want to. The last thing you want to do is throw out, say the range is 500 to 600, and throw out a $400,000 offer and insult them, because they're just not going to look at you. They're not going to respond, and they're not going to engage with you on that sale or potentially other sales, particularly if you're looking in that marketplace. So you've got to be really wise to tread very cautiously, and I wouldn't be throwing out an insultingly low offer. But if the range is 500 to 600, doesn't necessarily mean you need to come in at 500. It just really pays to do your research. And if you think the fair value is more like 480 to 520, then there's nothing stopping you, as long as you can back your argument. Because a lot of the times, and I know I've been questioned personally by agents, how did you come up with that offer? So by having some, again, we come back to it, some comparisons to fall back on and say, well, this one sold for 489 and it's pretty similar. That's the reason why we're offering 485. So yeah, it depends on the property, depends on the relationship, and depends on what's sold as to where you kind of really come in. But yeah, 9 times out of 10, I'm going to come in under their guide, because I'm going to find properties, because it's in mine and my client's interest to find properties that kind of suit our, not lowball offer, but our lower than guide offer.
Yeah, I think it all comes back again to what type of market you're in. I mean, essentially, there could be 1,000 people that inquire, not 1,000, maybe 100 people that inquire about a property, and there's only going to be one buyer. And so real estate agents, they're people, they're like you and I, they've got their own lives, they've got their own families to feed. And, if you're going to waste their time or annoy them by throwing in really low or ball offers, they're just going to get really frustrated with you and sort of blow you off straight away. And as brutal as that sounds, I'm speaking out of my own shoes. I'm not speaking out of a real estate agent's shoes, but yeah, essentially you're going to waste their time and they're going to get frustrated and they're probably not going to call you back. So if you're throwing in a really, really low ball offer, it's probably not the best scenario in like a really hot market or something like that, where there are definitely cases where it does work. And I think, if you are planning to throw in a low ball offer, don't do it nastily. Say, sort of talk to them a little bit. Say to them, hey, you're really not going to like me after this low ball offer, but this is all I've been finance for, or this is all the amount that I can, or I've done my comparable sales, I've done my due diligence, and honestly, this is what I think the property's worth. Would you be able to talk to your client and just see if this is something they'd be comfortable with? Don't go, call them up and say, hey mate, I'm going to give you 400,000. Befriend them, because even if it's not that property that you're going to buy off them, it might be another one that you could get pre-market, which we've talked about in a previous podcast. So I definitely think befriend them as much as possible, and just don't sit on tread on their toes. They've got a life and a job and a family and everything as well. So we're all in this together, really. So after I've thrown in a low ball offer or a medium offer or a higher offer, are they just going to accept that offer, or are they going to come back with a counter offer? And how many times does a counter offer really occur?
Yeah, look, it kind of depends on how low ball your offer was, or how interested. Again, the how much demand there is on the property. If there's not that much demand and your offer was there or thereabouts, then you're probably going to come back. They're probably going to come back to you, maybe not necessarily with a counter, or they might just say, we need more money. I know a lot of the agents that I've been dealing with, they won't come back with a figure. They'll just say, you're not quite there yet. Come back to us with a little bit more. So you're kind of bidding against yourself, but you knew that to start with because you were coming in well under what the ask was. So it depends. I mean, by countering yourself or even countering the vendor's offer too many times, it kind of shows that you've got an endless money pit that you could fall back on, and therefore the agent will try and use that against you. So I'd be cautious not to counter too many times, and maybe make those counters a little bit more solid rather than throwing $500 in them 12 times for argument's sake. So I'd keep your counters to a minimum. I'm not saying don't do it, but keep them to a minimum just for that reason, so they don't think that you've got endless amounts of cash. And just be mindful when you're countering against yourself or against blind competition, which I know we're going to touch on in these upcoming questions.
Yeah, 100%. And I think just be very mindful of countering against yourself. I mean, we all do it. And if you started a real low ball offer, it's obviously going to have to happen. But I wouldn't, countering yourself. Like, again, the agent to actually specify a price. And, sometimes you just got to eyeball them and say, look, what will get the deal done? Like, what is the price the vendor will take? At least get them to say some sort of price instead of just, hey, you're going to have to come up, or you're not quite there, or, that's the tactic that they're trying to do. They're trying to get you to bid against yourself. And it works majority of the time. But, if you've done the valuation in your due diligence and you know what the property's worth, then, you can be somewhere in the park figure that you think would be reasonable, and try and get a figure out of them. And then, as Joey said, you don't want 12 counter offers. You kind of want, 2 or 3 to get to that point. And then, obviously we'll cover this, but get to your happy point where you're comfortable with, what you want to pay for the property, and then hold solid. Like if you're going over your budget, don't go there. Like just hold solid on the final figure that you get to. So, Joey, the real estate agent says they have another interested buyer. It's pretty gut-wrenching. I really wanted to get this property, but I don't really believe that they've got another interested buyer. So, but what should we do in this scenario?
Really comes down to whether you've got someone on your side or not. If you've got someone like a buyer's advocate or a buyer's agent on your side, 9 times out of 10 they've got that relationship with the agent, and they'll know if the agent is being truthful or whether they're lying, or you'd at least hope that they'd know. So a lot of the time that can help alleviate that kind of issue. If you're going at this on your own, and even buyer's agents as well, a lot of the time there is no way to know. There's no way to know that you could be countering against yourself. Look, I mean, as agents, got code of ethics to abide by, and shouldn't really be coming back saying, oh, I've got an offer of X from client number 2. But you kind of have to take people at face value. And if you think the property is worth that extra and the agent needs, you say you've both tied on $500,000 and there's another party that's come up and made the same offer as you, and you still think that 505 is a good buy, even if there wasn't another bidder there, you'll never know. If you still think 505,000 is a good buy for that particular property, then make the purchase at that price. The only other strategy you can use, and it comes back to what you've touched on a couple of times, Jordan, it depends on whether the market's a buyer's market or a seller's market. If it's a buyer's market and we just know from market sentiment that there's not that much competition out there, you can just wait. Make your offer, and if the agent says, oh, we've got another offer of this price, you're definitely rolling the dice, but you could just wait a little while. And then they could potentially come back after, say, 48 or 72 hours and say, oh, look, we're actually going to take that offer. Or you may well lose that property because there may well be another bidder. It's genuinely you're rolling the dice. I like to take people at face value, but as long as we're buying where we see fair market value, and I'm not going to go bidding against myself and paying an astronomical price that I think is just way too overpriced for that particular property. But if it still makes sense, then you're going to have to buy it, and there's no way of knowing, and you will never probably know.
Yeah, 100%. And I think, Joey, you've touched on the next question there too, which was, when should I take if there is another buyer seriously? And I think, it depending on what you value the property and what sort of market you're in, that's when you should really consider it. I think there are little key indicators that you can sort of definitely know that there's another interested buyer, or maybe there might not be. So little things that I've noticed throughout my journey is, when an agent says, we've got another interested buyer, but the settlement conditions aren't favorable. And, it's kind of like, well, are they another buyer, or are they just, annoying? Are they there? Or are they real? And what they're essentially doing there is just trying to give you that FOMO, like you're going to miss out, or they're going to make the deal happen, but the settlement conditions aren't favorable. When, in all seriousness, if there's a very interested buyer, the settlement conditions can be altered. If they're at the right price point, a 30 or 60 or 42 day settlement in Sydney can be adjusted like that. Those conditions can be adjusted if they really, really want the property. So if they're sort of saying they've got another buyer, but, things aren't, exactly what the vendor wants, then you can take that for a grain of salt. But in a circumstance where they say, hey, listen, we've got an offer for $535,000. It's going to sell tomorrow night if you don't make another offer, then, that's when I would probably take it a little bit more seriously and go, okay, well, they're actually told me what the offer amount is. They told me that it's going to sell. They've told me that they've told all other interested parties that are on the property. So, if that's a price point that I might be comfortable with, then I might go up to, 540 or whatever. And then as long as you're comfortable and happy with that price point, then at least, you're not going to miss out, or you're still in the market. But yeah, there are some little key indicators, as Joey said, it's really impossible, and you're never really, really going to know. But there are some things you can sort of question whether there really is or isn't another interested buyer.
Yeah. So, and on top of, sorry, Jordan, just on top of that, I mean, in a normal market or in normal times where you could go and physically inspect the property as well, you'll just have that, you'll have that gut feel. You'll feel the vibe. If the property is open for a half hour and there's 30 people there, you can probably take the agent pretty seriously if he says there's other interested buyers. If you've been to the property 2 Saturdays in a row and it's been you and one other person that's come once, you might be doubting the truthfulness behind that comment made by the agent. But if the place is heaving full of people, then you could probably take them pretty seriously.
Yeah, I totally agree. And, if you're seriously interested in the property, just touching on that, like go to every open home. You're going to look like you're really, really interested in the property, but you're also going to get so much information from the people that are coming. If you saw one person the first time, and then the next open home, they brought their family. And then the next time after that, they've brought, their extended family. And then, they're sitting there talking to the agent. You'll probably gauge that they're a pretty interested buyer. And I don't know if you're like myself, I love to talk to people and see what's going on, engage their things. So, if I see someone who looks pretty friendly at the open home, they've been there once or twice, I'll go, what do you think? What's the price point? All that sort of stuff, and try and get as much information out of them as I can. And I do it from the agent as well. I try and, befriend the agent as much as possible, because they need to be your friend at the end of the day. At the end of the day, you want to be the person that the agent wants to sell the property to. Because if you're both coming in at the same offer, they're going to put your offer forward first. So essentially, I try and just get as much information and befriend as many people as I possibly can. And then that way you can use that information to analyze where you actually think the property or other potential buyers might be. So, Joey, the property is set to go to auction. Should I put in a pre-auction offer?
I'm going to start this answer by saying it depends on your particular marketplace and what is happening in your marketplace. Only 3 months ago, back in January or February in 2020, I would have said yes, purely because every auction that we were going to, we were seeing prices just go absolutely ridiculous. So to come back to that, I would have done it in, say, January or late last year. But that's only when you do it in a really, really hot market, in an absolutely bustling seller's market, a lot of the time the agents would just say no unless you had some really strong terms. You could close quickly, or you could offer them, like a really, really solid offer. But a lot of the times the agents just want to take it all the way through to auction. In a buyer's market, you'll notice when the shoe goes on the other foot and the selling agents try to take offers prior to auction because they're worried about the turnout and the attendance to auction day, whether they get no bids at all. In that situation, I would be going to auction, watch the auction. Potentially, you might be able to snap up a bargain at auction. If not, let the property pass in and you can just negotiate afterwards. And that's where you could pick up a really, really good property at a really great price.
Yeah, I think you've touched on everything pretty perfectly there, Joey. I mean, essentially in a hot market, an agent wants to go to auction because auctions are where emotions come into play. People start bidding aggressively. If it's a parent bidding for a young family member or their kids or whatever, they get involved, and on the day they can whisper to their kids, "Oh, we'll give you an extra 10,000. We'll give you an extra 20,000." All these things go into a hot auction, which ultimately increases the price of the property. But if you've done your due diligence, as we keep banging on about, and the price of the property and you're happy to pay that and you're financed and ready to go, sometimes it's not a bad idea to just consider having a discussion to the agent and just say, "Hey, listen, how did the vendors feel about going to auction? Would they be happy to settle pre-auction? Do they want to go straight to auction?" And if you get that strong auction feeling from the vendor, maybe it's good to steer clear. But if there's some indication that they might take a pre-auction offer and you're ready to go and you're happy with the price, it doesn't hurt to put that forward. But one thing that you sort of do want to avoid is having a pre-auction auction. So essentially what happens in that scenario, if there's 2 or 3 really interested buyers and you put an offer in, then that night they've got to put it forward to all the other interested buyers and say, "Hey, we've got an offer, blah, 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 blah." And then those other buyers can come in and try and counter offer on top of you, not counter offer, but put an offer in on top of you. And then you're essentially having a bidding war before the auction. And that's not an ideal scenario anyway. You're better off just doing it on auction day because you can see everyone else's emotions play out. So yeah, it's a bit of an individual circumstance scenario, but I think it sort of leads into our next question a little bit, Joey, is when is it ideal to buy pre-auction and more advantageous to go on auction?
So as I touched on, then to buy pre-auction, it's going to be when a market is super hot and there's a lot of competition amongst buyers. Definitely you're right to be mindful of getting and entering in a pre-auction auction, as you've just touched on there. It's to get something pre-auction, you're going to need to understand the vendor's motive for sale. It might be a distress sale, it might be a divorce sale, it might be the fact that they've already purchased another property and they really need those funds quickly in order to settle on that purchase that the vendors have made. In those circumstances, in a heated market, pre-auction offers are looked at and looked at pretty seriously, but particularly if they're a decent enough offer. And that's where I've had clients who've had success buying pre-auction in a heated market. It's only when the vendor's motive for sale is very apparent and may well suit that pre-auction offer. But as I've touched on, if it's a buyer's market and there's not much competition out there and the property is scheduled for auction, I wouldn't be making any pre-auction offers. At the very least, as I said, I'd go to auction. I went to an auction just before the elections in 2019, and the property is worth probably $1 million. And there was 2 registered bidders. The vendor's bid opened the bidding at $800,000, and one bidder put in an offer of $805,000, just threw a $5,000 bid in and picked up a property that's probably worth $1 million today. So that was an example of when to go to auction. Had he have thrown out a pre-auction offer, the agents were guiding 9 to 950. He would have made that offer based off their guide, and probably would have thrown an offer of, I don't know, 880 or 900 out. And he's ended up picking it up for 805. So it's really important to understand the market conditions at the particular time.
Yeah, 100%. I think you've touched on a really good point there, Joey, which was, understanding the vendor's situation. And I guess this comes back to trying to befriend and get as much information as you possibly can out of the agent. If the vendors are in a position where, they've purchased another house and they need a quick settlement, well, maybe they do want to sell the house as quickly as possible. And if you've got the right conditions and at the right price point, then it may be a good way to get a quick deal done. And I think, it's just using as much of that information as you can to your advantage. So, Joey, we have decided to put in a pre-auction offer, and we've just been on the phone to the agent, and we've put the offer in over the phone. Is that considered an official offer?
Look, it depends on the agent. 9 times out of 10, no. Some agents will take that as they'll at least take it as a conversation starter that they'll most of the time bring to the vendors. Lots of the times the agents, particularly here in New South Wales, want that offer at the very least in writing. And a lot of them, particularly if you're going to an auction, they want that on a contract with a 66W here in New South Wales waiving the right to a cooling off period if we're talking about pre-auction. Otherwise, if it's just a normal private treaty, then again, they'll use that as a conversation starter to the vendor, but lots of the agents that I'm dealing with want that offer at the very least in writing, ideally on a contract.
Yeah, 100%. And I think, the next question is, what is the difference between that sort of verbal offer and a signed contract? And I think you've touched on a little bit there, Joey, but essentially, the signed contract, it means you're more serious, really. You've put down that, as we've discussed before, sort of pre-deposit, which was 0.25% in Sydney and $1,000 in Victoria. And we're not sure about other states. You might be able to confirm that just by searching online. But yeah, essentially, if you're signing a contract with a number on it, and you've given them that sort of initial deposit, you're more serious, and you can sort of use that to strong arm yourself into a better position. You're not really, as we're saying, not mucking around the agent, not trying to get them to get an offer in. But, if you're at that point where, you've sort of gotten a price from the agent and you're not too far away and you think you're nearly there, sometimes a signed contract can be a little bit more enticing for the vendor to, realize, okay, well, we're at the pointy end now. Let's get a deal done. Any more comments there, Joey?
Yeah, it's exactly as you said, and it's always a really good bargaining chip for myself as a buyer's agent, and I know from experience with sellers agents that they love nothing more than to waive a signed contract under a seller's nose, even if it's slightly less than what they wanted originally. Let's say they wanted $550, but the offer's $530. Waiving $530,000 under someone's nose is 9 times out of 10 going to get them to at least look at the offer and take it pretty damn seriously. So we always use that as a bargaining chip. We like to keep a little bit of cash up our clients' sleeves, put down that offer. If they come back and say no, and it's approaching the top of where we'd like to pay, then I'd give them the exact same offer, but on a signed contract. And a lot of the time, that's just the final little kick that we need to get us over the line without paying that additional X amount.
Yeah, so Joey, we've put in our offer, we've done our sort of counter offers, and we've gotten to a point where sort of at our maximum, we're at our limit, and they still want more. Should we increase our offer again?
Really comes down to, firstly, do you have the funds? Is it going to overstretch you? Have you run calculations based off this in that position? But it's not only the case for private treaty, it's often the case with when preparing for an auction to set that limit. Now, and it's a really wise piece of advice that I heard some years ago when particularly going to auction. It's mainly the auction mindset, but you could definitely use it when buying private treaty to have something else to fall back on. I know that you might be in love with property X, but have property Y and ideally property Z, so that you don't feel as though you need to overstretch yourself. There's nothing worse than paying an extra $30,000. And not 9 times, but often if you don't have anything else to fall back on and you've put all your eggs into this particular basket, you will potentially overpay. Whereas if you've got something else to fall back on, you're more likely to go, you know what? No, I'm not going to pay any more. And you're either going to get the property at the price that you wanted to pay, or it may indeed stay all over, but at least you've got properties behind you to fall back on, going, you know what, that's fine, I'll let that one pass in, but I've got these ones to fall back on. So, and I'm not to say that you have to do that in every situation. If this is a property that you love, it's an owner-occupier, you can see yourself raising your family there, you need it, then okay, have that conversation with your partner, your loved ones, your family to go, okay, maybe let's increase it by a little bit. But yeah, it's a sound bit of advice to when you're making negotiations to have a couple of other ones to fall back on, so you don't overstretch thinking that this is the one and the only. There's plenty of fish in the sea.
Yeah, 100%. And I think that the having the finance available is the critical piece there. I mean, if you've got the finance available, but you've done your due diligence and you know the property shouldn't really be worth anything more, then maybe it is time to walk away and just have that limit, set, have that negotiation plan set before you do go into it. But I think there's a couple of ways to look at it. I mean, I know we've been, told our whole lives that properties all increase in value continuously, and generally they have historically. And so, the way some commentators put it is, if you're planning to hold on to that property for 10 or 20 or 30 or 40 years, is $10,000 or $20,000 extra going to really hit the back pocket over that sort of time frame? And the answer generally is no, but obviously you've got to take everything with a grain of salt and not put yourself in a financially hard position or be uncomfortable with what you are putting forward. And I think also in that position, don't be scared to play strong for a little while. I'll give an example from one of my properties is I negotiated a certain price and the deal was essentially done. I just didn't know it was done. But the real estate agent was hounding me for an extra, 10 grand initially, 10 grand, wouldn't do it. Then 5 grand, wouldn't do it. Then we got to the point where we were signing the final contracts. All the changes had been amended. I was in the room with the real estate agent. He's just like, come on, can you just give me one more grand? And I knew exactly what he was doing. Thankfully that I got a real estate agent as father and told me what he was doing. But they'll essentially do anything they can just to get a little bit more money for their client. So sometimes it pays off just to hold strong. And you as we've touched on, you really don't know who else is out there, what the other buyers are out there. You could be the only buyer out there, and essentially you're bidding against yourself, and you're giving another $1,000 for no reason. So sometimes it pays just to hold strong as well. So Joey, we are at our absolute maximum. We don't want to spend any more money. We've done our due diligence. We know what the property is worth. So how could we make our offer a bit more enticing without paying more money?
By making sure you've had that good conversation with your broker, a really great strategy, and a lot of people aren't in the position to do so, but by reducing that settlement period, if you can, for whatever reason, you've got the conversation with your broker and your broker said, yeah, we can close in 3.5 weeks, or we can close in 3 weeks. By throwing that out there, it means that the vendor's going to get the money in their pockets quicker. That will often work as a bit of a sweetener to the deal. Potentially, you might go the complete other way, and the vendor might not actually want the money for another 6 months. So by understanding what suits the vendor, you might be able to save yourself a little bit of cash or securing the property at your last dollar rather than overreaching like we just touched on before. As I said, the vendor, for whatever reason, they might be needing that money in 5 months' time or 6 months' time and not immediately. So by delaying your purchase and by pushing that settlement period out, you could also be saving yourself that little bit of money there as well. So there are a couple of little ways to really tweak it. Again, you might offer that delayed settlement period, but you might say, but I'll rent it from the owner in between now and then, if the property is currently vacant and you're already in a position where you're renting as well. So just by being creative and thinking outside the box, not exactly an answer to this question, but a really good strategy that I've been using for quite some time, not only for myself, but for other clients. Rather than making your final offer, let's say you had $550,000 to play with and you were in around that 540 mark, rather than making your final offer a nice clean 545 or 550 or 540 or 547, 500, like the increments that the agents love going up by 2,500, 5,000 or 10,000, make it a really obscure number. And I love doing it all the time. I say it's at 546,500 because that's where my client's pre-approved limit is up to. You sell a really sincere story that it's pretty believable. And you're not lowballing them. You're just trying to save yourself or your clients or whatever the scenario you're in that little bit of extra money, just as they were trying to push that little bit extra out of you. By making your final offer in a really obscure one, it makes it look like it's literally all you got. And that's been a strategy that's helped save. I know it doesn't sound like much in the scheme of things, but if I said to you, would you rather pay or save an extra 4,400? I'm sure your answer would be save it.
Yeah, exactly. I think I've heard that one a couple of times, and I think that's pretty critical. I think one thing my dad's always said to me is, it's a $5,000 conversation, and when you're negotiating on a property, you don't really, $5,000 sometimes doesn't really seem a lot, but when you take the context away from the property and you turn it just into a conversation, or in that situation that Joey was just saying, it's a $4,000 conversation. So it's not, you really got to take the emotions, take the property out of perspective and just say, okay, the deal's essentially done, but what are the little things that we can do? And I think, the settlement period is definitely an ideal one here. So I'll always start my settlements on a 90-day period. And essentially what that does is give me some freedom to, if the client does want to, if the vendor does want a quicker settlement, my final offer could include and a 60-day settlement, as long as the mortgage broker is happy for me to do so. But yeah, it's just about finding those little things that makes the vendors a little bit more comfortable. It might even be, they're selling their property, but they haven't bought another one yet, or they haven't found a rental. And so they might be a little bit like, well, what are we going to do if we sell it? And you could say, okay, well, we'll offer you, 2 weeks. You can rent it out for 2 weeks after we've settled, or, we'll give you as long as you want in the property and you can pay the rent, but there's no rush to go and buy another one. And that just gives them a little bit of ease of mind. They don't have to, move into another house before they move into a house that they buy. Gives them a little bit of freedom to say, okay, we can just keep all our furniture and stuff here until we're ready to find another one. Obviously, you don't want them in there for 6 months, but at least give them 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 4 weeks or something. But yeah, just for, as we've sort of banged on a little bit, is find out the information from the vendor and what suits them, and that'll get the deal done in some way. So, Joey, after my offer has been accepted, does that mean that the property is mine?
Absolutely not. So the property is not yours until we've received both parties signed contracts. So you need to sign the front page of the contract, and the seller needs to sign the front page of the contract, and that deposit needs to be paid. Only then is the property yours. And again, even another caveat on top of that is if you've got that cooling off period. So you need to wait until the property is actually being cooled off. So once the properties have both been signed, you've paid that full deposit, whatever you've negotiated, 5 or 10%. Only then, and again, I keep throwing caveats out there. It's there to lose, I suppose, for whatever reasons, and properties do get lost in that settlement period for finance or building and pest reports or strata reports that something's come up in that settlement period and you've just lost your deposit, but it's almost worthwhile losing rather than following all the way through. So the property isn't yours until the day of settlement. Once you've settled successfully, again, you get in touch with a good conveyancer to help you get over the line there. Once you've settled successfully, then the property is yours. You kind of, you don't have to worry, and the property is unofficially yours once you've successfully exchanged, not once your offer has been accepted. Once you've successfully exchanged, you can kind of sleep at night knowing that you will have it, and then the property isn't officially yours until settlement day.
Yeah. Until that title's in your name, it's not officially yours. But yeah, I think Joey touched on a really good point there, which was find yourself a good conveyancer. There's all types of clauses that can potentially go into a contract before it's signed, and they might be beneficial for you. They might be beneficial for the vendor. But a conveyancer or a solicitor will really be able to identify if there's anything not favourable for you that you should be aware of, or any special conditions. I think Joey, you've touched on it, but yeah, you can put in the contract, subject to building and pest inspection, on a private treaty, not at auction, subject to finance approval, subject to conveyancer's approval. Like there's all sorts of things you can put in there to sort of catch yourself out, but take them for a grain of salt as well. You're going to have to act pretty quickly. And obviously every state's have got different settlement periods as well. So, obviously look at your local state laws to see how long of a settlement period you do have to potentially pull out.
Yeah, and you can't get into the property until the day of settlement. The agent might let you in during that settlement period once you've exchanged to, measure the kitchen or to double check something. You'll be able to go through for a pre-settlement inspection to make sure that everything is as when you sign that contract, but you're not able to go in and start moving things around and knocking down walls. Circumstances, if both vendors, the vendor and the buyer's solicitors agree there are some circumstances, and that's happened to me personally, where you can gain early access. 9 times out of 10, it's only to do cosmetic work, so nothing that's going to put you or the property at risk. It might be to clean or to replace a garage door or to give the property a lick of paint. But there are little things you could do. If, for example, this is an investment purchase, you may engage the vendor solicitor to see if there's any chance you could use the for sale photos as your for lease for day X, and you've got to get marketing and whatnot, and it's going to take you a longer time to find the tenant. So I mean, I've done that personally as well. I've used the for sale photos as my for lease photos, and then you could use and don't waste that settlement period. It's there to try and, I don't know, for you to try and think outside the box and get creative to save yourself $1 or $2, or to reduce that vacancy period if that's an investment property.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, on top of that, I would include it in the contract wherever possible. Like if you know that you're going to rent it out straight away, it's an investment property, have that in the contract. Have it in the contract that you're available to use those photos for your listing things. You're allowed to have 2 inspections prior to settlement, subject to the vendor's availability or whatever it may be. But yeah, really have those conversations before you sign the dotted line to ensure that you can benefit from those sort of situations. So, Joey, some of the properties that I've seen have generally sold over that agent's auction guide, and why do they sell over those prices?
As you've touched on earlier, like the guide's always going to start pretty low, and it's to entice those who probably don't have the budget to click, to get the views, to go along to auction, to drum up the competition, to make it seem like there's heaps of demand, 50 or 60 there watching the auction, which makes the bidders feel like, gee, this is hot property. I want to pay overs for it. So, and once we come into the actual auction, we're in auction conditions, and that's when you can throw. Yeah, you can throw proper mindset outside the window, and emotion really, really, really takes over. And for anyone that's been to an auction, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Even if emotion, you might have that partner speak to their other partner and say, blah, 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 whisper in their ear, and they throw out an extra $10,000, $20,000, $30,000 more than they had originally anticipated on paying. And it's just that competition. It's the whole reason why auctions exist, and it's the whole reason why in a seller's market, the agents really, really push for auctions. It's not only people's emotion going, gee, I love this property, I'm willing to pay whatever for it. You kind of get that sense of, I want to beat that person sitting next to me throwing that offer out. How dare a battle between a handful of bidders, and they just want to win for the sake of winning rather than thinking about the dollars that they're putting out there and throwing bids out in order to secure the property. So a lot of the times that it's that instinct that we have to want to beat our competitor at whatever it is that we're doing. And a lot of the times it comes as the result that follows is a sensationally high end sale price for that auction.
Yeah, I think you've touched on everything perfectly there. Like, I don't know if you've ever played sport or anything like that, but if you think of a time in your life where you were just full of adrenaline, you had complete tunnel vision to achieve your one desired outcome or your one desired goal. I mean, that's essentially the position the auctioneers are trying to get you in. They want to you have the tunnel vision that all you can do is buy that property. That's all that matters. You're going to beat everyone else and you're going to be the winner. And essentially, sometimes that's what happens. And that's why we say, don't let your emotions get involved with the process, because that's when property prices go 50, 100, 200 grand over the advertised price, because you literally zone everything else out. All you want to do is win, and you're not thinking, as Joey said, about the money, about how much you've been financed for, if you can even get the money. And yeah, I just think it's better to just cool off in that sort of situation, walk away if you have to, especially if you don't have the money. But yeah, just really do your due diligence beforehand and know what your absolute limit is. So I think that is another awesome episode, Joey. I'm really happy with that one. I think we've touched on some really good points there. I think negotiation is kind of one of the things that's not commonly talked about. I mean, there's a couple of books and stuff out there, but it's as we've just gone through, it's a long process. Like, there's so many different things involved and unknowns if you've never bought a property before. And I think, this is really what scares most people, and kind of why they do approach, a buyer's agent, because they don't want to bid at auction and they don't really know how that whole process really rolls out. And so I think, if someone's buying a property on their own, they can use some of the methods in here. As we said at the start, everyone's got their own strategy and plan, but I think the key is to have a strategy or plan and just know what it is moving forward. But hopefully we've sort of cleared some of the array areas around there that you weren't sort of sure about. And then obviously if you're still concerned, I would approach a buyer's agent like Joey and just sort of get their input. If it's only to bid at auction, they offer that services as well. So if you've already got your house and you definitely want to buy that, and you're pre-approved and you've done your due diligence or whatever, and you only want them to bid at auction, they can do that sort of service, but obviously they can do the whole thing for you as well there. So Joey, mate, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you once again.
Mate, it's been my absolute pleasure. And as you've touched on there, it was a really good overview, but there are 1,001 other factors that could just pop up. You don't know what's going to happen when you're particularly negotiating on that one specific property. So it starts with your research. As long as you understand what fair market value is, then you should be okay. But again, as we've touched on 1,000 times in this podcast, there are so many other different factors that could arise. So use this as a handbook, as a guide, but it is not the be all, and it's not certainly not the end all. Again, as we've touched on the previous podcast, keep the questions rolling in. We've got a short list that we've already started putting together and compiling. So thanks to those who have already written into both Jordan and myself. So we are compiling those questions. Keep them coming in, because we're not far off putting them together in one, maybe even two podcasts, Jordan, and distributing that.
Yeah, 100%. I think I've had about 8 so far. I don't know about you, but yeah, I think we're nearly getting to that double episode podcast. So before we do the first one, if there's anything you do want to put in there, we might have a little bit of bias if it's a good question. So flick it through and we'll chuck it into the first episode. But yeah, we're looking like 2 episodes there, mate. So loving the feedback, guys. As always, drop a 5-star review on both podcasts. We really appreciate it. We do this for you guys. We both really love talking about property and sharing all our knowledge and all that sort of stuff. But, we do it for you guys. So we'd really appreciate a 5-star review, or just any type of review would be amazing. But yeah, keep the feedback up, guys. Keep the questions coming through, and we will catch up with you next time.
Catch you guys.
Again, we are planning to do a Q&A session very soon. So if you want us to answer any of your questions, please send them through to hi@jordandeyong.com. I'm always looking for more guests to come onto the show. If you're under 30 and have 1 or more investment properties, whether it's good, bad, or ugly, I would love to talk to you about it. Even if you're interested into getting into the property sector, let's have a chat. The main focus is to help other soon-to-be young investors with tips and tricks along the journey, learn from the mistakes that we have made, and ignite the fire to set themselves up financially for the rest of their lives. If you're interested in sharing a story, you can go to jordandeyong.com/podcast, where there's a podcast inquiry button at the top that will guide you through the next steps. If you want to see what else I'm up to, you can go to YouTube and type in Jordan De Jong, where you'll find the Smashed Avo Property podcast being hosted on YouTube, and plenty of other content that I'm putting out consistently. If you're keen for more content like this, make sure you subscribe, and please leave us a review with any feedback for future podcasts. And until next time, happy house hunting.